Hello, I'm Tessa Shepperson and I'm here with Sean Hooker of the Property Redress Scheme and Hamilton Fraser Insurance with our Westminster briefing. Sean, what do you have for us?
Thank you, Tessa. Right, it's 2019. This is going to be another big year for the letting industry. 2018 was traumatic enough, wasn't it? So what have we got lined up now for 2019? Well, in the middle of December, the Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Act was finally passed through through Parliament, okay, and went for royal assent. Now, this essentially is the Karen Buck private members bill, and it is basically empowering tenants to actually take legal action against their landlords for not keeping the property up to a reasonable standard. Now, in the past, it was the local authorities that had the power to do that. But we all know with local authorities, it's enforcement isn't always at the top of their priority, and there's also quite a long process to actually go through. So the new act will make it easier for a tenant to take unilateral action against a landlord for not keeping that property up to a reasonably fit standard to live in. So that has gone through, and now when that's going to come into force, we're not quite sure. Usually the government look at around about April for bringing these things in. So that's the first thing I think needs to be noted. So it's updating the law and allowing, the obligations are still there, but it's updating the law.
So that the landlord at the start of the tenancy, it's got to be, was it fit for human habitation?
Fit for human habitation.
So I suppose that basically means no category 1s or category 2s.
Correct, absolutely. So this is important that the standards of property are going to be should be rising. Right. So the big one, Tenant Free Man.
Yeah.
Now,
what can we say?
Okay, so that passed through again in December and went for royal assent. So essentially what's going to happen is that will come into law. We're again assuming that could be up and running by April. It's gone through quite a long process, and those people that have been following your blogs and and the other things there know that it has changed slightly from what it was originally conceived to be. I think the two main points that have changed. One is that the limit for or cap on a deposit, the government had originally proposed 6 weeks, but has now accepted an amendment to take it down to 5 weeks. So the maximum deposit that a landlord or an agent can take now will be 5 weeks rent equivalent as a deposit. Anything over that will be an illegal fee. So you have to bear that in mind if you have got, if you were taking 6 weeks or maybe longer deposits, you will no longer be able to do that. It's going to be capped at 5 weeks. Now the logic behind that is that, yes, it will cover 1 month's rent, but also the government was persuaded that things like cleaning or repairs should be no more than an extra week on top. The industry is not very happy with that because, if you have an exceptionally bad tenant that leaves the property quite dilapidated, you could be out of pocket.
What about pets? Because often people charge an extra deposit if they're allowing the tenant to have a pet. I mean, is this going to make it more difficult, you think, for people with pets?
Well, so long as it's within the 5-week cap, then yes. I mean, you could say, well, basically, I'm taking 4 weeks to cover rent and any dilapidations, and an extra week for the pets. We'll have to see how that pans out and whether it's a practical thing there. But it comes down to this issue of affordability for the tenant, and rightly or wrongly, the government have been persuaded that to the lower costs of taking a tenancy, a tenant should be capped at 5 weeks.
Is there an upper rent limit for this?
I believe that if you have a rent of over £50,000 per annum, that you can take whatever deposit you like up to.
So for the more expensive properties.
For the more expensive, yeah. So
it's not an issue.
It's not an issue. So if you've got one of the, I mean that's going to affect people in the southeast, particularly HMOs and stuff like that, where it's not beyond the
Maybe
not beyond
students-
imagination to have an HMO.
With a
On
lot
a
of
joint
people.
several tenancy with a large deposit over £50,000 for rents over £50,000. But the government said, well, okay, we'll set an arbitrary cap at 50,000 for the rent, and then
Okay.
after that you can take a larger deposit because your risks are probably higher or whatever. But that's the major tweaks to it. The other minor tweaks are around default fees. Now, default fees.
Yeah.
Quite common in the industry, lost keys, change of tenancies and other stuff there. They've tweaked that around to be a little bit more transparent so that agents and landlords can't think up imaginative default clauses to put into the tenancy agreement to justify taking additional payments. Yes, a landlord and an agent should be protected from the misbehaviour of a tenant or a tenant wanting over and above services. However, rather than a list of prescribed payments, they have a process now of justification, reasonability and other stuff there. I think that's going to be quite an issue for people like me and the redress schemes of determining what is a reasonable fee and what isn't a reasonable fee.
If a tenant thinks a fee is unreasonable, what are they going to do? Are they going to...
They can make a complaint to a redress scheme, for example, or they could try and test it in court. But I think mainly, if you think you've been overcharged a fee or charged a fee that falls within the legislation, I think maybe the first port of call is to raise a complaint and maybe go through the redress.
Because you can do that with a letting agent, but I mean, if it's charged by a landlord, what do they do then?
I think you would have to
go to court.
Go to court and get it enforced that way. But
Yeah.
it'd be very interesting to see how many prosecutions will emerge from the new bill, and whether the news will get out there,
Yeah.
to allow tenants and landlords to know what the environment is that
Yeah.
they're meant to be living in. But we'll see. It's a big issue for the industry.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there will be a lot of teething problems with it. We have to see what enforcement is going to be. It's a big shake-up, and I do
Yeah.
appreciate that. And businesses and landlords are going to have to carefully look at the legislation and how it's going to apply for their businesses. A little kind of a tweak on the legislation was quite interesting, because government is committed to bringing client money protection out
Yes.
in April at the same time. And
Yes.
they put provisions in the Tenant Free Bill to allow the appointment of providers on that. Now, when the original concept of the CMP was being discussed, it was thought that basically those landlords that already, those letting agents that already comply to and have client money protection in place through the trade organisations,
Like the Isla scheme.
would be absolutely, they are already covered and move on.
Yeah.
However, when the government put out their tender document, their idea was that they were talking about what they were saying, unlimited cover, so that every landlord or tenant who had client money with an agent could expect to get that money back in the event of a misappropriation or a default of the company. However, the trade organisations lobbied Diane Hayter, who's a lord in the House of Lords, to put an amendment in to say that the Minister of State could set a limit which was below full cover.
Okay.
Now, on one hand, you're kind of saying, well, actually, is that kind of diluting or watering down the cover? Because if an agent goes out of business, will every person get compensated back to where they stood?
Yes.
Or, is it something which is probably a sledgehammer to crack a nut? Because what we're basically talking about the large high street brands who have tens of millions of pounds of client money.
Yeah, could be a big
But,
payout.
but they have processes in place and procedures in place to safeguard that money internally. And if they were expected to go out and get an insurance policy that covered their entire risk, it would probably be prohibitively expensive.
Yes.
And was that necessary for an industry where we know the biggest risks of client money disappearing is with new startups and smaller agents?
Yes, not the big companies.
So what the government has now put into the Act is an amendment to say that the Minister of State, based on evidence provided to him, could set a limit of what that cover will be. The analogy that's been used is the financial services compensation process, which is limited. So if your bank goes down, you're only limited to
50,000 or 80,000, I can't remember.
80,000.
Yeah.
So yes, it will not be 100% cover, but it will cover 95% of the market, and 95% of the market will be subject to.
So if a landlord has a large portfolio, he might perhaps be advised to use several agents.
That is one of the bits of advice I've heard.
Yeah.
So if you have a large portfolio and you are holding, tens of thousands of pounds of, or your agents are holding tens of thousands of pounds of your money.
So split it up. So it's not all in one.
So you're not, you can avail of, more than one claim.
Because that's what people do with banks, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah.
That's what they do with their investments.
Yeah.
So
Nobody puts all their eggs into one basket.
Yeah.
So that's part of the advice that might be having to be looked at. Although, as I say, the cover limits will be quite high anyway.
Yeah.
And you've got to remember in this that when it happens, it's catastrophic to the individuals, but they are very, very rare. We do hear nightmare stories of 200, 500,000 pounds, even £1 million disappearing. But I think you could probably turn around and say that the established high street traders are not that sort of risk.
No.
But do your homework, as a landlord, and to see if what cover is in place and whether it's appropriate to you.
And ask about it.
And ask about it. So that will be coming through on there. Right, now what's going on in terms of the thoughts of the government? One of the things that I think we've all welcomed is a move closer to better regulation in the industry. Mm-hmm. And the government has set up a working group.
Yes.
Chaired by Lord Best, who is a lord who has got a long history of interest in the private rented sector. So was seen as quite an appropriate person to coalesce around a working group. They're calling it ROPA, Regulation of Property Agents. And it's going to cover not just letting agents, but also estate agents and property managers as well, to try and get training and a code of practice and other regulatory framework in place to professionalise the industry.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment there are several codes, aren't there? So it's a bit confusing.
There's a lot of codes. And and if you join an organisation that has a code, that's quite right that you abide by that code. But for universally, what can we have, and how can a consumer judge you across the board? You make an informed decision. So they're looking at maybe a master code overarching
one code to rule them all.
One code to rule them all. They're also looking at qualifications and training. So it's very important that the person that you are dealing with has had appropriate training.
Yeah.
And to what level should that be? Who should be trained within an organisation? I mean, a lot of organisations you join, you say the principal, has to have undertaken training, but shouldn't the people who are actually dealing with the customers have some level of training? And to what extent should that training be done? And also, one of the things that I've certainly raised is things are similar, but an estate agent is different to a letting agent to a property manager.
Yeah, they've got different
so
roles.
They're different skills. So how do you accommodate the different skill sets and the different levels that you need in there? But I think it would be important for the consumer to know that the person that they're going in is a qualified person, has been through some form of training, is undertaking continued professional development.
Yeah.
And it's something
like in the legal profession.
Absolutely.
In the legal profession, you can't practice unless you've done all your stages of training. And
correct, or accountancy, or any of these
yes.
businesses.
So I think it's only right.
Absolutely, absolutely, and certainly on the property management side, I mean, in the light of Grenfell, the training of property managers is very, very important. You know, and you know, there were good courses out there already, you know, through the trade associations, through other providers, but getting it unified into some form of base code or base qualification, and then, you know, working with the training providers, for, you know, to improve the industry. And people like yourselves have, you know, been great advocates for that for many years. You know, and landlord law is a very, very good way of actually understanding the industry and training
what your obligations are.
So that's coming on board. So you know, they are undertaking a series of meetings. They've selected various people there, but we've got a chance of inputting in. So they didn't want a committee of 200 people kind of trying to decide that. So they've kind of distilled it down to representatives from all the areas, and once that reports, I'm sure that the government then will be seeing how that can be looked into going into legislation. I understand that the Estate Agency Act already allows a provision in that, but there's nothing for letting agents.
That's right.
To put it through there. So do you do it in 2 stages, or do you try and pull it all in and get and say, well, we're going to have an overall bit of legislation that will make it mandatory for qualifications of the code, etc. Whether that will lead to anything else like letting agent registration or other sorts of regulation, you know, it's going to be, we'll see how that works out.
Well, they've already got it in Wales, of course.
They've already got it with Rent Smart Wales, and Scotland, of course, have their own system as well. So, you know, England is going to catch up with the rest of Britain, and hopefully we can have you know, a professional industry, or at least demonstrating as being professional industry, because there's so many people out there that are professional, but they get mixed up with the people that aren't. And you need to have that differential, and you need to say, well, actually, I've been through that.
And you need proper enforcement. I mean, one of the problems we've got is there isn't any proper enforcement.
Correct.
And so that's a big part of it. I hope they're going to look at that.
Well, they are looking at it, and apparently a bit more money. They're extracting more and more money out for some of this enforcement. Although it's still a drop in the ocean. It's going to be interesting how we do that. I think the third thing I really want, you know, the third area I want to just. Or was it the fourth one? The government started a consultation on a housing court.
Housing court. Yes, that'd be interesting.
Very interesting. So it's streamlining the current system. Because at the moment you have your magistrates' courts and your county courts, your magistrate courts for criminal issues, and of course you've got the property tribunal.
Yeah.
Now the property tribunal can deal with certain things, the magistrates with certain things, and the
tribunal deals with other things.
County courts can deal with other things. So an overall housing court that encompasses the whole of the property industry. We'll deal with things like evictions, we'll deal with things like deposit protection violations, could deal with banning orders, could deal with a whole host of stuff that take it away from the you know, from the other courts and streamline the whole process. Now, this is literally a concept idea, but it's something I think the government is quite keen on, because it is something which they can attach their political banner to.
I think one of the things that would be good about a housing court is you'd actually have judges who are trained in housing law. I mean, one of the problems people have in the county courts is a lot of the judges haven't got a housing law background. Maybe they're a family lawyer, or they come from other area, and their housing law knowledge may be sketchy.
Yeah.
And that can be a problem.
Yes, and you get this kind of the dichotomy that suddenly you get through one process and then it has to be referred to another court.
Yeah.
And there's that famous kind of story, I can't remember the full details of it, of a London circuit judge who was both a member of a tribunal and a county court judge, and decided, you know, at the same hearing to deal with the two issues by, well, kind of changing his hat halfway through. Of course, that was challenged because it hadn't been through the due process, but housing court could safely do that. Could safely do that.
Yeah, it could save a lot of time, and people would know where they stand. I mean, duplication is always a problem.
Absolutely, duplication, and then of course contradiction, and cost and time is also very important. A lot of these issues, the court process is not fit for purpose to deal with. Things like the fitness, human fitness. You want that property to be brought back up to standard. So so if a tenant goes and makes a court claim, how long will it be while they're living in that? Do they have to vacate the property? Do they, if at the end of it, will it be up to the standard that they need? They're the ones that are having to live with it, whilst they're trying to get justice. So, very interesting. So that consultation finishes on the 22nd of January. So if you just put into your Google search engine Housing Court Consultation, it will come up with the page, and you can. It's an online questionnaire, the usual government online questionnaire. Please feed into that, because at the end of the day, what we want is a professional, a safe, and a consumer-friendly industry. Which, and if we can get that into place, then it's going to be beneficial for all parties. So we are facing a tough year in 2019. Your business models will have to change. It could cost you more money, I'm afraid, in the short term. But if you can start thinking about how you can restructure your portfolio or your letting agent business to adapt and accommodate to it, it's still a very healthy market out there. And I don't see any kind of a big trend to the demand falling.
Well, people have got to have somewhere to live.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely,
that's not going to change.
Not at all. So 2019, another year of change, another year of disruption and adaptation. But be positive. Keep up to date with all the changes you need to do, and make sure that you are prepared and ready to adapt and to thrive in this industry.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sean, for your Westminster briefing, and hopefully we'll be back again later in the year.
Thank you very much, Tessa.
Thank you.